Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Victor Dover. I'm a former chair of CNU, and I'm here to introduce my friend and colleague, Bruce Stevenson. Dr. Bruce Stevenson is a professor of environmental studies at Rollins College. And Bruce, what you need to know about Bruce is that he is dedicated to the art of city planning. His research and teaching reveal how history connects planning, sustainability, and urbanism. He studies history, and he's got a little history himself, and I get to share some of it. Bruce calls himself a champion of the pragmatic application of the liberal arts, and he has earned the respect not just of all of us in the Florida chapter of CNU, of which he is a founding member, but also from an array of leaders, boards, and committees in the civic arena and the academic world. Pragmatic application, a deep connection between the academy and civic leadership. Those who've read Bruce's biography of John Nolen will recognize that as what folks in Wisconsin at the time of Nolen's young adulthood sometimes called the German model, connecting the leadership of the state and the university. Well, Bruce lives that ideal at Rollins and in Winter Park and in Portland. And as you will hear, he doesn't hold back. His blunt comments on civic issues in an endless number of hearings, editorials, media interviews, series of PBS documentaries, they all show his trademark combination of optimism and determination. Now, Bruce is from Florida. He's a native of the Sunshine State, and he earned a master's degree in city and regional planning from Ohio State. He then spent 2 years with the Pinellas County Planning Department. Bruce, you don't have to prove your courage to us in any other way. But then went on to earn his PhD at Emory University. Bruce's doctoral research then pulled back the veil of history from something amazing. He found and revealed John Nolen's previously undocumented 1923 plan for St. Petersburg, arguably Florida's first comprehensive city plan. And Nolen's blueprint for that is the focus of Bruce's first book called Visions of Eden. Dr. Stevenson's Nolen research connected him right away to what later came to be known as the New Urbanism movement, before New Urbanism even had a name. Bruce, as a graduate student, I first heard you speak in 1990 when you presented your findings at a John Nolen symposium hosted by the University of Miami at the invitation of our teacher and our mutual friend, Liz Plater-Zyberg. And Dr. Stevenson absolutely electrified us with that presentation. A number of us ran out and read John Nolen's New Towns for Old for the first time. And we looked up old microfilms, remember microfilm, of his speeches in the proceedings of the planning conferences from the earliest days of our profession. Now, since then, Bruce kept going with that research, and he's written extensively on Nolen. His latest book, called John Nolen, Landscape Architect and City Planner, which is published by the Library of American Landscape History, documents Nolen's genius for design as an act of social reform and reveals why all these years and decades after Nolen's career wound down, CNU Florida names its highest award, the John Nolen Medal for contributions to urbanism. Now, Bruce also wrote a new introduction for a republication of Nolen's book, New Ideals in the Planning of Villages, Towns, and Cities. Nolen wrote that near the end of World War I, and it laid out principles he would follow in the design of new towns and neighborhoods all over the country, but especially in dozens of assignments in 1920s Florida, including Venice, Florida, the plan for which you can see behind me on this side is actually embossed on the Nolen medal itself. So with that, let's give, if virtually and by Zoom, a big CNU Florida chapter welcome and applause for Dr. Bruce Stevenson.
Well, thank you so much, Victor. That's very kind. One thing, when you get to be my age, you've been around long enough, you have information to share. And actually, I'd like to share my screen with you right now. And by the way, I'm broadcasting from the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon. I moved here in 2015, and I've got a new book coming out. This is a shameless plug called Stepping into Portland's Good Life, A Lesson in Sustainability. And as part of that, I sold my car. So I've been without a car for 5 years. It's great in Portland. When I go back to Winter Park, I feel a bit of like a target, but I'll conclude with some hopefully good things that were John Nolen's story that I'd like to share. I think I think 6 degrees of separation where we can see John Nolen, his influence is not just in Florida, but also whether it's Portland or Orlando, we have some common principles I'd like to share with you today. And also why the John Nolen Medal is so important. So I am going to hit share screen. And there we go. Title of my presentation tonight is John Nolen, Patron Saint of the New Urbanism. And like I said, I think there's 6 degrees of separation for John Nolen. When I was a young planner in working for Pinellas County, I lived in Clearwater and I used to run. And I'd go out every night and risk my life because in 1978, I'm that old, they did have running shoes, but there wasn't many safe places to run. But I found this community called Bel Air, Florida, which I don't know if you've ever been, but I got to Bel Air and I couldn't die. They had things called sidewalks, street trees. It was an amazing experience. And Bel Air is on the cover of my book of John Nolen, landscape architect and city planner. And I did not know at the time this was designed by John Nolen, but I knew it was a really cool place and it worked really well. And of course, if you look at the plan for Bel Air and Seaside, you get some pretty interesting points of view. And of course, this is a great one. I took this quote from James Kunstler: Seaside, Florida is a modified neoclassical grid straight out of John Nolen. And what I'd like to share with you tonight is not just the similarity in design, but the values that Nolen held to, the principles he put forth. And I think it's his principles as much as his design that are relevant today. And I wrote an article called John Nolen's Legacy for New Urbanism in View magazine. And it's really interesting. On his deathbed, the last person he spoke with was Raymond Unwin, who designed the first Garden City, Letchworth. And this is this little quote. And Nolen thought, you know, we had this great run, but I don't know if anybody will ever remember what I did. And what most people don't know about Nolen is in the last years of his life, during the Great Depression, he made his living do less consulting by teaching at Harvard. And he was at Harvard University in 1934 teaching in the landscape architecture program. When the rug was pulled out from underneath him and the landscape architects, a new modernist dean came in, a modernist architecture, and they threw out the landscape architecture department, closed Harvard University for a year, the city planning program. It came back a year later, all the landscape architects were gone, and in their place was Victor Gropius. And so Gropius heads everything. And what happened to Nolen? Well, John Nolen was lost for 50 years, and it's Andres Duany, Elizabeth Platter-Zalberg, and the new urbanists who bring him back to relevance. So one is his legacy. The other thing, I think it's so timely for us today, was John Nolen's, this is another piece I did called Racism in City Planning. And Nolen dealt with race at early point in his career. His first job as a consultant was in Charlotte, North Carolina. His first night in town, he was invited to a play. It was called The Klansman by Thomas Dixon, which is also the play that became for the infamous movie Birth of a Nation, where the South was portrayed as fighting this war of a war to reclaim the South, and some people are still fighting. And Nolen was shocked with this and couldn't believe people actually were looking at the Civil War as a thing to be rethought and reconsidered. And of course, at the same time, people are putting up all the monuments now that we're tearing down, and Nolen had to confront that. And this is a photo of an African-American neighborhood in Roanoke, Virginia, that he thought should be invested in and improved. And I think what's really gets fascinating with Nolen is if you look at his Venice plan, because the plan for Venice wasn't just about the town of Venice, it was a regional plan, and this was for an African-American community. And if you look at the design of Seaside and the design of Harlem Village, as Nolen called it, you see a lot of similarities. And the third point I want to cover briefly tonight is sustainability. So we want to look at legacy of design, Racism and Sustainability. And this is an article that came out about a year and a half ago on Lewis Mumford, John Nolen, and the origins of sustainability. And it's the introduction for my new book. But one of the things Rick Hall wanted me to make sure I mention about John Nolen is how he started off. Because what's different about Nolen, unlike the Olmsteds and some of the other city planners, they came from pretty elite backgrounds. Nolen is much different. When he was a year and a half old, his father was shot and killed, not that it makes any difference, but by a Republican in a heated debate over counting votes. And this was in Philadelphia back when they had political machines. And Nolen's father was killed. And back then there was no safety net. Nolen lived hand to mouth, barely survived. His mother remarried. And when she remarried, they sent him to this orphanage. And this is called Girard College. Girard was the wealthiest American when he died in the 1850s. And he put his wealth to create this college for orphans. So Nolen would spend his formative years as an orphan. But look at the design of this place. Imagine getting up every morning and seeing that. And what he came to realize was the life, as he called a good citizen, because at Girard College, the Bible was not taught. Everything was about deism and how to be a good citizen. And so he learned this idea of discipline, education, and a well-ordered physical environment was key to societal advancement. So Nolen will have this training as a designer and planner, I think, from early in life. And I took this quote from Nolen, and it is about what he calls the activity of thought and receptiveness to beauty and humane feeling. That's what he learned while he was at Girard College. And while he was there, and this wasn't uncommon, but he spent a lot of time studying the Renaissance. And hopefully you're all familiar with this painting. It's of the ideal city in 1450, and it announces the rebirth of classical design and classical formation. And this was really central to Nolen's education. Also, he is the first person from Girard College to go to university. He goes to the University of Pennsylvania. And at the University of Pennsylvania, he studies the Renaissance. And he's in the Wharton School. And the Wharton School in 1893 isn't like the Wharton School today. It was founded on how can we invest in society to make sure we don't have continual cycles of boom and bust. And this is a painting of Lorenzo del Magnifico of the Medici, pointing to young Michelangelo, of his work of art. And the reason I think that's important is when you were in the Wharton School, you studied the Medici, that the Medici were the model for American prosperity. And this great American Renaissance that occurs during Nolen's lifetime is always formulated when we're looking as a nation, how do we go forward? How do we invest our wealth? We need to be like the Italian Renaissance and invest like the Medici. But what was different, while the Italian Renaissance was stepping away from Christianity, Nolen and his crew were stepping away from Christianity and into Darwinism, and that they began to study that the human species was a product of their environment. And also Nolen was trained in the German method of analysis, and he begins to study the city. And his honors thesis is actually an analysis of the utility company in Philadelphia, which was run by a corrupt monopoly that he identified, and it was run by the same man who shot his father. So there's this interesting story that goes with Nolen, where he's constantly looking for reform through the lens of the Renaissance. And I love this painting I show to my students, but I think this pretty much identifies who John Nolen was and that whole school of planners from the 1890s up through the 1930s. And this is a quote from a speech that he gave. And it says, "Oh, once the civic consciousness is as keen in the individuals, we might then be tempted to believe in the words of St. John, that we saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of God out of heaven." And it was this belief that it was no longer the Bible, but it was civic consciousness, our civic investment, that would determine how we would move forward into the future, and that heaven could be created on earth. It wasn't something we earned, but it could be created by creating better cities to live in. And this is a famous painting called The Architect's Dream by Thomas Cole, and the idea that our society, as we move forward, God and nature sets the limits and we operate within those limits. And that really becomes the basis of John Nolen moving into city planning. But his first job is he's teaching at University of Pennsylvania, administrating an adult education program. And his role is to bring in the professors, and this is Woodrow Wilson is one of them, W.E. Du Bois is the other, and he'll be the devil's advocate for discussion. So he gets this really strong educational foundation of intellectuals across the spectrum, and he takes a sabbatical and goes to the University of Munich to study Italian Renaissance art and town planning in the tradition of Camillo Seat, who was Austrian and really set the tone for German town planning. So Nolen comes back with this pragmatic education, and he always has photos of children in these planned communities because it takes him back to his idea as an orphan. And this is the a German workers' community, excuse me. And here's another apartment with our community garden. So these are all ideas that are brewing in Nolen's head when he returns to the United States, and he is taken in, accepted at Harvard University to study landscape architecture. Charles Eliot, the son of the president of Harvard, had just died. His father had written this book, and he had hoped Charles Eliot, his son, would be a great landscape architect, and Nolen really pretty much becomes his new adopted son, and Nolen becomes this transformative figure at Harvard. And on the left is Charles Eliot's idea of interconnected green spaces and parks, and Nolen will learn at Harvard this basic element of landscape architecture, the same that was used in the painting of the Mona Lisa, that follow nature than your imagination. And this becomes his point of reference. And I think the other important thing that I'd like for us to all remember is that, Frederick Law Olmsted designed Central Park. That's the beginning of town planning, but it was his sons, the Olmsted brothers, who first put the park system in, of the idea of a comprehensive park system that's connected. And that occurs in 1903, the year their father died. And this is what John Nolen was studying at Harvard, the Portland Comprehensive Park System. That was his training. And this is Portland today, and this is the legacy of the Olmsted Brothers Park Plan. And this is Forest Park. You can see how dominant it is. And I put the photo on the right from a week ago when we were under the apocalypse and the fires. That Portland, though, despite its great planning, it still deals with the issues of climate change. But here is the Portland Park Plan, and this is Nolen's first comprehensive plan. As you can see, for Roanoke, Virginia, this is done in 1909, and he goes in and analyzes the environment and puts in these two really key points. This is Mills Mountain, and this is part of the Roanoke riverfront. And there's what they look like today. This is also the beginning or ending point, however you'd like to look at it, the Blue Ridge Parkway. And this riverine park is all part of a 26-mile bike trail. The other thing is, if we have organic design that's informal, we also have organic design that is formal. And what Nolen learned about formal design was the Italian Renaissance garden. And this is a famous garden outside of Florence. And here's the villa. And the idea is, in this formal design, the key of the Renaissance, we're no longer looking up to heaven, we're looking out to the landscape. And when you leave this, you're drawn to this view, and this is what it looks like. And you get to this point, and looking through that little hole, there's this view over over Florence, with the Duomo in the background. And so the whole idea of formal design is to have these vistas, to have these views, to have this ordered environment for us to contemplate our surroundings. And here's how it works. I just took the same plan, and you can see Venice, Florida is laid out on this same formal design. And here's the view you get in Florence, and here's the view you have in Venice for free from right here. at the public beach. And the other thing I think is important for Venice is this is the town hall. And I don't know if you could read it, but that says view. And Nolen would always take the most important civic building, the place where we make our decisions, the heart of the Republic. And you would make sure that they had the most beautiful view of nature. So from the place of government to the most beautiful view of nature, humans would exist in between that. This is a photo, Prepare to Meet Thy God, of downtown Roanoke in 1909. Again, John Nolen's first plan. And his response in this formal design is to create a civic center. And what Nolen always does, he learns, is to make anything you propose, make sure you study the local history. So he proposes this formal civic center based on a city hall and other important civic buildings on the University of Virginia, that this is his model. So when he introduces this to the citizens, it's not a foreign idea. The other thing is equity. So we have formal, informal, and equity. And when Nolen first comes to Charlotte, this is on the left, he'd never been south. And as I mentioned, his first night in Charlotte, he ends up sitting through the play The Klansman. The next night, he's invited to the special dinner and sits next to Thomas Dixon, the author of The Klansman. So imagine you're John Nolen, and his wife had actually worked in the progressive African-American movement. He's talking to the author of one of the most racist screeds in American history, and he's just dumbfounded. But that does not charge him from changing, from his view of the city. And I want to make sure this other idea, and I think it's so important as urbanists, and it's the idea that the city is a living organism, not a machine as the modernists would have us think, but a living organism. And when you look at a Nolen's plan, to keep an organism alive, all parts of the body have to be healthy. And you can't tell where the black section is or the white section. And he saw this awful impoverished area and said, economic, sanitary, aesthetic, humanitarian, this has to be improved. But Nolen's start really doesn't hit until he becomes an advocate of the English Garden City. And the English Garden City, hopefully we're all familiar with that, but it grew out of the second most read novel in the 19th century, Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy. The first is, it'll come to me with the Uncle Tom's Cabin. This is number 2. And looking backward, this guy, kind of like Rip Van Winkle, falls asleep. There's a awful, dirty city. He wakes up, it's a radiant green city. And Ebenezer Howard becomes the head of the Bellamy Society in England, and he also draws the English Garden City as a model of good urbanism. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I think we're all familiar with it. But I think what's important, there's the English Garden City with the town center, the green belt. But this is a photo from 1909, and it's a tour of the English Garden City of 150 Americans, and it's sponsored by the Boston Chamber of Commerce. Again, it's this idea of not the government, but kind of what we call nonprofits, that the idea that the public sector is intimately involved in the improvement of the city. And what Nolen learns from the English Garden City is what Howard called the middle way, where you could have this urbanism of about 15 to 17 units per acre. But to do that, you had to have these really quality public spaces. If you can put people in an urban condition, but give them public spaces to work in. And this really becomes, Nolen has a background as a landscape architect, but I can't make this point hard enough, especially given to where we are today, that when Nolen becomes a city planner, city planning as a profession is equated to worker housing. This is Wilmington, Delaware in about 1915. These people are waving American flags and they're protesting for quality housing. And it's interesting to note that the capitalists before World War I would build worker housing because they realized they would get better workers. And this is one of Nolen's early communities. You can see it's the English Garden City, drop down in Wilmington, Delaware. And again, here is all the children which is key to always his design. Is there a place for the quality of the child's life? But the idea of worker housing really doesn't catch on until World War I. And of course, the Germans, all these studies have been done since centennial of the World War I, and like for every 3 bullets the Germans shot, they'd get 1 hit. For every 5, it'd take the Allies, the British and French, 5 shots. Why? Well, the Germans had perfected worker housing. So the idea was the Germans were more precise, they had better workers because they put in better housing. So there was a meeting of the English Garden City Confederation, and there's John Nolen, who happened to be there in 1916, where the English were investing in worker housing so they could compete with the Germans. And this comes to the United States, where the United States government invests heavily in creating quality worker housing in communities where munitions and ships especially were going to be built, because we'd have to get the ships and the munitions to Europe. And this is Union Park Gardens. And you can see here's the informal design of nature, which you can see. And here's the formal design of the worker housing, where this connects up to the green space. But look at the quality of the housing 100 years later. It's at the right density. This is a duplex. And you can see it's got that type of scale, that type of sense of place, pedestrian scale that's made it invaluable and priceless. And the other thing, this was built in a relatively short time, that this was built in about 6 months. And it was kind of this amazing transformation for city planning. The proof city planning had a purpose. And Nolen, as Victor mentioned, put this book together. And I found this point, this advertisement, and the whole idea was when you returned from war, the idea the government would provide worker housing. So the belief was the worker housing that was provided in World War I would be provided to America at large. Of course, the sad truth is that didn't happen. What Nolen did manage to get, though, was a huge investment by the wealthiest woman in the United States, Marie Emery, and she lived in Cincinnati. Her husband was a wealthy real estate developer, and he designed Marymount as the model. He even called it the exemplar city, which would model how we could do worker housing in the 20th century. And if you look on the left, there's Letchworth. On the right is Marymount, where it's even called the National Exemplar, is the name of the hotel. And here's the plan for Marymount. My recommendation is that Florida CNU should visit Marymount on a fall weekend. And everything you can want to learn about city planning, good town planning, is in this, where it says follow the physical situation topography. These green spaces are all places you don't want to build on. The town center isn't quite in the center, it's on the highest point. But let me go through some of these basic points of Marymount and why it's so important. I want to show you, first of all, why this area was preserved. Well, here's what it looks like. It's a steep ravine on either side. And really, I think you could film The Last of the Mohicans there. So it's really this bit of wild nature. And you go from this bit of wild nature here, and then I want to show you this spot right here, because it's the epitome of the art of town planning, I think, of what I saw in Nolen. Here it is. The only thing in town was a cemetery. So a church was sited here, non-denominational, a small green here, and across the way is a neighborhood center, mixed-use neighborhood center, where these are aligned. This is a park that's located right here, athletic field. But let's see what it looks like. There's the mixed-use town center. There's the small green. This is a landscape architect's office, and this is the view he has, where the center point of this bifurcates this center point, and there's what it looks like today. Arguably, to me, this is kind of the test of the art of town planning, how well this works in a small town. And I actually got to speak in this church, and there's me speaking, but here's the slide I showed. And I ended up moving to Baldwin Park to get this organic density you got at Baldwin Park, this 3-story quality urbanism that gets us to that scale, that makes transit work, that makes walkability work. And that really, I think, is the basis of what we need. And I think that what, as Nolen called it, the genius of place, and it's integrating, how can you create urbanism like this so you can protect natural spaces like that? And the other thing, the architecture this is of Mariemont's weathered really well. This is when it was built in 1923. This is what it looks like today. This is another one of these worker housing units, amazingly artistic. And Nolen was inspired again by the Germans, and there's the kids in the German affordable housing. DOT screwed us with this, but take a look at the view of this. This is designed literally to be a work of art where each of the yards are slightly stepped back to give you this amazing vista. And the other thing about Mariemont, I want to make sure we get, and it takes us to all the lessons we've learned, that here's the town center, here's the town hall, and here's this walk along nature to the most beautiful spot in town. Again, Nolen always makes sure that people's lives revolve around between their duties to the Republic and the beauty of nature. And there's the town center, but let me get a little closer to what I really wanted to see was this concourse right here and the parkway in between. There's a parkway, parkways. This is not a parkway, this is John Young Parkway in Orlando. Somebody should sue the city of Orlando for calling this a parkway, because these are the type of things that happen on John Young Parkway and, you know, SUV death. But I just took this from a news clip. But to get back to where we were, excuse me, here's where we cross the parkway, and there's that concourse. That's the terminus of Mariemont. And look what happens when you look out the window. I put another Thomas Cole painting in there. And when my students took this is what everybody gets for free. This is the public realm. This gives us that view to nature like we saw in the architect's dream. And this is really, when we design places, this is the type of art we need to produce. And the other thing, this is also an architect, kind of like Seaside, an architect's laboratory for Atterbury, where this little neighborhood here, he experimented with these duplexes. Because again, it wasn't all about the single family home. About a third of the housing in Mariemont was various forms of what we call the missing middle today. And the other thing about Mariemont are the connections, amazing connections that we have throughout the town. And this takes us to the epitome of Mariemont, family values, that all ages could live there, maybe what we need to have in COVID, and the fact that it's a place for ages to grow and prosper. The other thing, Nolen came to realize that zoning is a negative measure, is about town plans, and he argued for the British town planning system, not a zoning system. And Nolen comes to Florida, this great, and Andreas talked about the 1920s boom, real estate boom. That's Uncle Sam eyeing Miss Florida. And given what happened, she probably should have gotten a prenup. This is John Nolen. This is actually what Liz and Andreas, their John Nolen event from 1990. And the idea, of course, was John Nolen came to Florida, the idea that we would create an American Riviera in Florida. And this was that first plan for St. Pete. And there we go. There's the same thing that we learned from Portland. Here's this green belt of land that should be preserved. And I learned, I didn't know this existed as a planner. This is the first work I did where we analyzed places you don't want to build. The red and orange are areas when a hurricane comes, you'll basically die if you don't move. And that's what it looks like today. Here's these same areas, and this is a Category 5 hurricane looking through Tampa Bay. We realized that Nolen, way back in the 20s, understood about sustainability. And he also, if you look at the close-up I have right here, he also proposed preserving the Barrier Islands. Because of the hurricanes, no one lived there. And you could have intense development like you'd see in the French Riviera, run people over on a tram to the beaches and create an American Riviera. And it's not that crazy of an idea. This is from his presentation. St. Petersburg at that time had created the St. Petersburg waterfront, the first public investment of its kind in the state of Florida. So the idea was simply transferring that concept. but it failed. The racism at that time, it's hard for us to imagine. St. Petersburg Times, Klan marches on eve of vote. This is Palm Beach County, which is even worse. And I took a quote from the plan John Nolen did for West Palm Beach, and he got this letter from the mayor. And he said, looking 25 years ahead, we are designating places where Negro occupancy will be encouraged. We are trying to put them in such locations as they most will be congenitally be situated to places of labor and fulfill the needs of white people. And Nolen said, forget it. I'm not going to do it. I quit. And the Constitution will not allow you to do that. And so Nolen got so fed up with that. He said, I'm only going to do private commissions. I'm not working for these people. They're insane. And he puts together this amazing plan for Venice, a wide-scale regional plan where some of it remains today, such as the green space along the Mayaca River. And again, his biggest concern was providing housing, quality housing for African Americans. And he went to great detail to provide this. And this is what he envisioned. This is worker housing he had produced up in Pennsylvania. This is kind of the scale of what he was hoping to do. Of course, that doesn't happen. The Great Depression hits, and Venice is only occupied in parts. But what I wanted to share with you as we start to go towards the end here was that John Nolen was also consulted in design of Rollins College. And talk about a great Renaissance village. There you go. No parking lots. This is designed for the college. And if you look at, here's the design for Venice and what Rollins looks like today, you can see this idea of an American Renaissance. In fact, there's a picture of Rollins, and on the left, on the picture right is Pienza. Pienza, Italy, I think we're all hopefully familiar with. There's a Seaside Pienza Institute, and it was designed to be the ideal city. There's Pienza, there's the ideal city, there's Pienza. And of course, here's the design for Seaside, and here's the design for Pienza. So we had this great classical architecture. The only problem is what happened to John Nolen, right? What happened to his thought? Well, when the Great Recession hit, Florida cities were abandoned, Nolen's commissions dried up, and he went out of business, essentially. He did some consulting work for the government, but he taught at Harvard. I always like to mention he was, into the green. He believed the city was an organism, not a machine, an organism for reproduction. He believed in the classical design, town planning as an art. He was also a card-carrying nudist, and I thought I'd spice things up in a few of his pictures when he was in a German nudist camp. But this becomes the face of Harvard and city planning. Gropius, not John Nolen, who started hanging out with Aldo Leopold in the 1930s. And like I said, when he dies, he's not sure if he is going to have a legacy. And what it took for Nolen to come back was urban sprawl. This is a map from 2000 of the most sprawled places in the United States. You can see Florida for number one, Orlando is number one, and there's a good co-relationship between sprawled cities and high pedestrian death rates. This is a map of the highest pedestrian death rates in the United States. And what happens when you're number one? Well, look at the angriest cities. Nice correlation. We're the angriest place. And this isn't Circus Soleil. This is just everyday life in Central Florida. The good news is the new urbanists came in. This is John Nolen's Christmas card from 1925, and they have taken what John Nolen did and it's made that a guidebook to how we should do development. And maybe what I want to close on is this idea of the future, I think, is the restoration of the human and natural habitat. And this is Baldwin Park. Hopefully, I think you're all familiar with it, but it used to be a Navy base, and Dwayne and Platter Zybrick had actually done a plan for Baldwin Park that I found. And part of their plan was to take the ideas that were Nolen had put in one of his first subdivisions in North Carolina and make that a basis for the plan. You could see that similarity. And this is what the Nolen community looks like today. This is that preserved green belt that's developed. And here's what the green belts, and here's what the preserved water areas in Baldwin Park look like today. It's pretty amazing what we've done from a natural point. And look at the urbanism, talk about walkable urbanism. I think the failure of Baldwin Park is they waited and did this type of work at the very end instead of the very beginning. But I'd like to close on Orlando. What's the future of Orlando? And this was a plan done about 10 years ago. The light pink is existing development. The dark pink is future development. This is if we follow sprawl. This looks like a lot like my students' eyes on a Friday, but this is walkable urbanism in relation to transit. And also, instead of investing in highways and extension of utilities, we buy natural lands to produce a green belt. And it's $27 billion cheaper. And when you look at, okay, Nolen to now, well, geez, there's John Nolen's plan for Venice. So we do have precedents for that. Even greater precedent, I think, is the city of Portland, which started this about 30 years ago. And that's me today. I'm finishing up this book, like I said, where I moved to Portland. I live right across the streetcar sign. This is my neighborhood that used to be a railroad yard. There's where I live in the black box and what it used to look like in 1939. This is Craig Utzler, coming of our students studying the Pearl District, because Craig is a developer for a creative village. And I think that project really typifies what we're doing in terms of, like the Pearl District, where I live, 30% of the housing is affordable. This is also the message at Creative Village. There's an early rendition for Creative Village. There's what it looks like today. We're both Creative Village and the Pearl District have 30% of the housing subsidized. There's this concept of equity and sustainability. And with that, I'd like to take this last item to look at the John Nolen Medal, which was beautifully crafted, and Victor and Rick are both have well-deserved earned the medal. And it's the plan of Venice on the back of the medal and John Nolen on the front. Thank you very much.
Bruce, that was a tremendous presentation. Thank you. And I'm glad that you can see this little red dot that says we're recording this because that needs to be seen by many, many people. Certainly some of your future classes could just take that and just sit and listen. It was just so illuminating and ties so many elements of our history together and how things changed and how things need to change back the other way. So thank you very much for that. So we're getting into the presentation of the Nolen Medal now that we know all about Nolen that we need to know. I want to say that the very first Nolen Medal was given to the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council as far back as 2005. And Victor was the chair of the Florida CNU at the time, and he and I worked together with some other hardworking people to establish this medal as something that would be carried forward as a tradition to reward people who had given of themselves to the profession. And I'm going to read the recipients. In 2005, Treasure Coast, then Robert and Daryl Davis, then University of Miami Architecture, where Liz Platter-Zybrick was, and then Walter Kulash got it, and then Dan Carey got it, and then Dover Cole got it in 2010. So we've covered 5 or 6 years getting down to 2010 with Victor and Joe getting the award. Then Don Martin got the award. Then Bob Kramer got the award posthumously. DPZ got it in 2012. Bill Spakowski, Billy Hadaway, Marcella Comblore, and then I was fortunate enough to be the recipient in 2017. Now, we have not had an award in 3 years. So I was the 13th recipient, and maybe that was an unlucky number, but mainly it reflected the fact that we need to keep going with our committees to make sure this award is given. And I want to say now that the 2020 award goes to Dr. Bruce Stevenson.
Oh, are you serious?
I am serious. And I want you to open up that package we sent to you.
Oh, God.
By FedEx from Victor Dover's office. This was, there are about 7 or 8 medals left in the first production run, and they were sitting under the desk of a Christian office manager there with Victor Dover. And so while you're opening that up, I want to show you, this is the actual medal, front and back, just like it's shown on the screen. There's a wonderful ribbon that holds the medal together and holds it up. So Bruce, well deserved, my friend, to receive this medal from the CNU Florida group. And
congratulations, Bruce. Hold it up.
And I just want to say I'm very honored to follow in your guys' footsteps. And just a note of levity, my wife is going to appreciate this because I'm going to tell her John Nolen's a nudist, and this is all I'm going to wear to bed tonight.
Well, I'm not sure the subject will be covered that way, but
but I am so honored. Thank you so much. And, you know, if there's anything, if we ever want to have one last blowout at Rollins in a conference, just let me know once we're healthy and we'll do it.
I need to share my screen now. See, I'll take that down. I'll go full screen here. So sharing my screen. This is the certificate for the Nolen Medal, and it's Congress for the New Urbanism, Florida on the top, John Nolen Medal. A little hint for folks, Nolen is L-E-N and medal is D-A-L. So there's a tendency to spell it N-O-L-A-N, but that's a different bunch of people. So Nolen for contributions, and on the occasion of the 15th statewide meeting in Tallahassee, Florida, the Florida chapter, New Urbanism, awards the medal to Dr. Bruce Stevenson as the highest possible honor conferred by the chapter. This award recognizes emphasized superior effort in furthering the principles of the Charter of New Urbanism in Florida and providing our state with examples of exemplary performance and achievement to which we all may aspire. And we got it signed by Lynn Richards and our current chair of the Florida chapter, CNU, Rick Geller. Rick Geller was not able to attend right now, but we do have a short video of Rick Geller saying his word of congratulations. Artie, if you can cue that up, I will stop sharing. But congratulations, Bruce. It's so well deserved.
I am so flattered. Thank you.
Yes, I'm just very, very pleased to do this. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick Geller, and I am chair of CNU Florida. I want to extend special thanks to Rick Hall, to Artie White, and to everyone up there at CNU Tallahassee Thomasville for putting together this virtual summit. And I'm with you this evening at Rollins College. Perhaps there's no better place to be when paying homage to our friend and colleague, Bruce Stevenson. John Nolen gave us his legacy. Bruce Stevenson continues to give us his. Just in the past week, 2 of Bruce's former students, Tim Maslow and Alex Stringfellow, were bringing a new form-based code to the Planning and Zoning Board of the City of Groveland. Bruce's legacy extends far beyond Rollins College and goes throughout Florida and beyond. And so it is with great appreciation that this year's John Nolen Award goes to the definitive biographer of John Nolen, Professor Bruce Stevenson. Congratulations, Bruce.
Very good. Well said. Well said from our current chair.
Well, if
Artie?
it's okay with everyone, I'll go ahead and kind of invite everyone else to this conversation so they can say congratulations in person. So if you're currently an attendee and you don't see yourself, I'm about to open it up so you can share your video and audio.
And Bruce, I intend to show your slides to many of our elected officials here in Tallahassee and Leon County over the next couple of months, where Artie and I are both residing, and because that missing history, we've got missing middle housing, we've got missing middle history of exactly how to pull these kind of towns together. And maybe on your way back from Portland, on your way down to Rollins, maybe you could stop by Tallahassee and help us give these guys the straight skinny on exactly what they need to have in their forefront of their mind when they're putting their towns together.
Well, I drove out, and if I drive back, I'm definitely going to stay in Seaside. So that'd be, I'd love to do that.
What? Well, we do have a nice town, but it's not as nice as Seaside.
Well, Bruce, congratulations. I'm unprepared. I only have Perrier, but this may be appropriate for a nudist. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm flattered.
Well deserved.
Thank you.
And Chuck Bowl, thank you for shepherding many of those Nolen medals through committee and out the door. Your leadership in shepherding that tradition along is very, very much appreciated by all of us for the last 15 years. Thank you.
It's always been a pleasure.
I'm Andrew Landis. I'm a student and a colleague of Bruce's at Rollins College, and Bruce has, been such a great mentor to me and paved the path for so many of us. And I work with Gabby, who's on the call, and Tim Maslow in Groveland, and a group of students. We were going to nominate Bruce for this award next year, and we were already planning on it. So this is great news to all of us. So we're very excited for you, Bruce. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And Andrew went to the University of Wisconsin, where John Nolen had done a lot of work, right? And got heavily involved in new urbanism. And I think a testament to the new urbanism, he went beyond a field I knew about in local food. And he's heavily involved in local food, and the new urbanist is now local food. And I think what's so exciting for me is to see these little ideas. Nolen might just had a kernel if he saw the plan for Marymount through or allotment gardens, but how the new urbanism has taken food and made that a central component of livability, and to see a whole new generation of, I'm ready to retire after this, thank you, of, students I've had and other folks picking up and doing things I, couldn't even imagine, 30 years ago when we started all this.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of working on Rollins on New College campus there in Sarasota, and so much of the Sarasota plan benefits from the legacy of Nolen. Just a tremendous contribution he made there.
I want to echo what Andrew said. As a past student of Bruce's, I think this award is so well deserved, and just listening to your presentation, even I was missing being able to sit through your lectures every day. So congratulations, and I couldn't think of a better person to earn this award.
Well, thank you. And the good thing you guys should know about Gabby, she's much smarter than I am. So it's always great to have really bright students carry on. And, it took me, I was probably 35 when I figured out where she is today. And she's also working at Groveland right out of Rollins. And I asked the first day of class, I said, tell me your favorite place. she said seaside. I go, this is going to be a great student. And so, you know, again, like it's so cool for me to see these students, you know, taking ideas that we've been wrestling with for years and seeing them as common sense. It's like what we need to do. And, you know, again, I don't, I mean, there's enough to despair about in the world, but I don't despair because of new urbanism and the cohort we have taking these ideas into the future.
Bruce, hey, listen, thanks for the great talk and the award simultaneously. I really enjoyed the talk, and I've reread all your books at least twice, and glad you got something new coming out. So I really do appreciate all you do. Thank you.
Well, I was thinking we could go out and rub our medals together and see if a genie pops up.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
You know, Bruce, one of the requirements for the recipient of the medal is that you have to give Zoom talks for our entertainment every day at lunchtime for the next 365 days. I'm sure that'll be okay with you, right? Because we were all sitting just as rapt as we were for this presentation.
Well, the good thing is the best legal marijuana store is right across the street. That's my biggest. Yeah, I take students out here. It's like, please don't go there till it's, you know, till you've signed off the liability form.
Never a dull moment.
Yeah, actually, we're supposed to have. I was supposed to have a class of students out in Portland. That's one of the reasons I'm here, trying to teach Portland virtually. But hey, and I was serious. I don't know if this would be something we'd be interested in, but if we ever wanted to take a group of CNU people to Marymount, Ohio in October, the one time a year it's nice in Ohio, we should, you cannot, you know, it teaches itself. And you actually stay in a hotel, you stay in a hotel called the National Exemplar. Let me see if I can get this, hold it. I still have my card key. You get a card at John Nolen to get in your room. and an extra drink down at the bar. So anyway, but I would be happy to do that if we ever want to set up a group and you could stay in the hotel. It'd be a great day and a half. And by the way, Rick Geller grew up right near there, and I know he loves the idea. So anyway.
David Brown did as well.
Really? Yeah, so I would offer that as something.
Bruce, while we were in doing the plan for Cincinnati, we took a side trip over to Marymount. And so I have probably 80 slides that I took, 80 images that I took of Marymount. And I was about to mention this before you did. And I mean, and I think we should at least do a virtual tour first while COVID is in full swing. But then at a time when we all can travel again, I would be the first one to sign up for a tour of Marymount with your leadership and your expertise on John Nolen. Take us down every street and every cranny and every wall, and because it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
I remember Andreas with his students from the University of Miami at the Granada Court in Winter Park. You know, he was measuring the size of the brick. You know, I mean, I can't do that type of detail. But there are enough cool, just artistic spaces where, you know, a day and a half, and then, you know, I'm thinking is we could also go the last half day to the Cincinnati Museum, which isn't too far away, and that's a whole nother, you know, element to this. But anyway, I'd be happy to do that if we want to set it up.
Yeah, let's keep that right at the top of our lists of projects to do. That would be great, because it's isn't that his most complete city plan?
Yes.
On the ground?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to test, it's astounding. And I enjoy trips to Venice, Florida too. It's also astounding. but not as three-dimensionally realized as Marymount. Marymount, really, you can see the whole idea in the third dimension, and it actually would be fun to compare the two. But Venice is probably one of the new towns anyway, one of the best realizations of a new town from Nolen's drawings in Florida. And I always tell people to go to Clewiston and go to Venice, and they can see why you can't just have a map. You got to have a three-dimensional idea for the future of the city, because there's no real reason why Clewiston shouldn't be as good as Venice or as good as Marymount, but it's not, because they had the map, they laid the streets out somewhat approximating the pattern Nolen drew, but they didn't three-dimensionalize the city, at least not yet, in the way that Nolen would have wanted them to. So it's very instructive, I think, for us, because in Florida we in all the plans that have been done and the legacy projects of the new urbanism and so on that have been done over the last 30 years or so, we were really just picking up again something that was really in full flower under Nolen.
And I was just going to add, if we go to the middle of October, it's like the zenith of fall. So you get that whole other dimensional. People are sweating back in Florida, we're in a really nice environment.
We're planning on taking our first COVID trip, 6-hour drive to Casters, North Carolina.
Does John Nolen have living descendants?
No. This is wild. His daughter contacted me. It's probably been 10 or 11 years ago. But their kids they went to MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. And his daughter was at Stanford, and she was a publisher. And she was just amazing, but she passed, 7, 8 years ago. And when I did the book, I had to look up, to get permits or whatever. And there was somebody in Texas, but they never responded. So no, there's no family.
Bruce, could you speak for just a moment about Nolen's thoughts about property ownership and management of his towns? He was kind of for public administration of some of the towns or portions of the towns, was he not?
Yeah, there's in Venice is probably the best example. There was a guy called Prentice French, and his uncle, or I think that was the same French who designed the Lincoln Memorial in DC. So he left him in charge of Venice. So kind of like Seaside has with their town architect, he would leave somebody behind to implement the plan and follow through. And usually the other thing, it is that Medici deal. There'd always be somebody in town who was a wealthy business person who had visited New York or Paris and wanted good planning, who would be the person that would see the plan through. And that would, San Diego, Madison's another good example of that. But he had this combination of always having a patron to do that. And the part two was these younger aides he would leave behind. And actually what's interesting, when his business went south, these younger people he had left behind were the ones that convinced the federal government to bring him back to Florida. And there's a great story at the end of the book where he meets George Merrick, and George Merrick and Nolen were going to plan a whole series of towns between Miami and Key West. But that didn't happen.
Yeah. But he had some feelings that the private development business would fail to embody some of the planning concepts that he had in mind, right?
Right. And he also
therefore the mentors.
And he also set up these committees. Palos Verdes, California, was an Olmsted project where they had a committee to review the architecture, and he tried to set those up as well. And those, Florida wasn't ready for that. In Venice, the guy who was left behind is, some of these people would come in with no concept of, and they were even calling it Venetian, I don't know, Nouveau Venetian or whatever it was. And Venetia, what's that? Some type of sausage? And so, I think part of it too was just dealing with that time, how difficult it was. And the other thing, all these consultants, there were no consultants in the South because none of the Southern universities did this type of work. So all the consultants were from the Northeast.
Yeah. Well, this has been very exciting for me, and I hope for all the people gathered together. We still have a good 13 folks on the line. For transparency and clarity, the process set up by Chuck Bowl and the original leadership of CNU Florida, this award is done by nomination of a committee. And the committee consists of a group of past Nolen Award winners. So we convene past medal winners, and we talk about who are the people that have performed well, like Bruce, and who are the people that are rising stars in the CNU community. And so that's the process that is now in place. There is no nomination process from the outside at this point, but it seems to be working well. And I think Chuck shepherded that committee structure along for many years.
Hey, Chuck, I wonder, could you describe the Barrett Award, which we don't give every year, but we had a rhythm going and giving every other year, for the group that's assembled here, so they have something to look forward to the next time CNU Florida gathers statewide?
Sure. So, and that's followed a similar pattern, but since the Barrett is every other year, it took longer to build up enough recipients to kind of form its own jury. And I think the dynamic of the Nolen Award has really been helped by the fact that there are such different people from different backgrounds and professions who received the award in all of the early years. So they formed this interdisciplinary committee that was really well suited to haggle over all the worthy nominees. And I think that's been a great process over the years. I always enjoyed just convening the call and hearing who they proposed in the discussion over that. So the Barrett, which I believe we've always called the Barrett Prize to distinguish it from the Nolen Award, was conceived to recognize specifically a designer, an architect, urban designer, town planner, who's also made kind of their own impact on new urbanism in Florida, but specifically through the design profession. And that prize has always been a unique work of art, a drawing that was done by Charles Barrett, who was he was the original, but he was certainly the best known and highly praised designer, renderer for Duane Plato Zeeberg in those really formative days. You've seen his drawings everywhere, whether you know it or not. And even in the earliest books on New Urbanism, where there were drawings of the Kentlands, early drawings of the Kentlands and places like that. They're very, very distinctive and memorable. But Andreas and Liz purchased all of the collected works from his family to preserve them and document them. And as part of this prize each year, selects one of those drawings to give to the designer who receives the prize. So that's always been a super special award that CNU Florida has done. So I'm looking forward to the next time we do that. And a great distinguished list of recipients there as well.
And Chuck, thank you very much for being a part of the committees that look for diversity, and as a result have 3 transportation engineers in the list of Nolen Medal winners. Walter Kulash and Billy Hadaway and myself. So thank you for that.
I think they were trying to recognize the weakest link and
trying to encourage us to do something right? Oh, mercy. Well, I hate to pull this to a close, but thank you once again, Bruce, for your years of dedication and your eloquence on projecting John Nolen into our lives and into our profession. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm flattered.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Night.